What's going on, Guardians? It's Tizzle here, and in this video I'm going to show you how to take your melee from this to this. That is an increase of over 3,700%. Pretty crazy, right? So strap in and I will walk you through the build that will have you one-punching Master Lost Sector bosses with ease. I've been playing with this setup for quite a while now, as the Infinite Suspend build for Titan was a boring way for me to play. I prefer to be aggressive with my playstyle, and this build is as aggressive as it gets. We pretty much just melee everything. And in a recent blog post, Bungie stated that they are nerfing Suspend. So I think this build is primed to take its place as the new best Strand Titan build. So obviously, this build is built around melees. We have a number of melees at our disposal, so we should be using the best Titan exotic in the game in my opinion, and those are the exotic arms Syntheseps. If you are unaware, these have the exotic armor perk biotic enhancements, increased melee lunge range, improved melee and super damage when you're surrounded. You only need 3 enemies within 15 meters of you for this to activate, and then it will linger for 8 seconds. So as we just mentioned, this build is all about melees, and these exotic arms will make any melee in this build deal 200% or 3 times more damage. It also buffs our super damage by 50% or 1.5 times more damage, and the Strand super is already very good on its own. So now that we have the exotic out of the way, let's talk about the aspects for this build. We have Into the Fray, which is aptly named as this build really throws you into the fray. This states destroying a tangle or casting your super grants Woven Mail for nearby allies. While you have Woven Mail, your melee regeneration rate is increased. And this is also getting a slight buff next season, as the tangle cooldown is going from 15 seconds down to 12 seconds. So this will allow you to have more uptime on Woven Mail. And we'll also use the tangles for something that I will mention soon. But next, let's look at the other aspect, and that is the newest one, Fletchet's Storm. We aren't suspending enemies with this build, so we don't need Drenger's Lash. Fletchet's Storm allows you to have a long-range melee that can be cast at a distance, and this melee is also enhanced by Syntheseps. So now that we know the aspects, let's break down the fragments that tie this whole build together. First, you want Thread of Warding. Picking up an Orb of Power grants Woven Mail, and with Into the Fray, that reduces our melee cooldown by 400%. Next, we have Thread of Transmutation. While you have Woven Mail, Weapon Funnel Blows create a tangle. We want to be making tangles as much as possible, so this will help with that. And ideally, you will always have Woven Mail going with this build, so any Weapon Funnel Blows when your tangle isn't on cooldown will create a tangle for you to keep the loop going. Next is the other big reason we want tangles, and that is for the fragment Thread of Fury. This fragment states damaging targets with a tangle grants melee energy. This fragment is extremely powerful, as the melee gains you get back from hitting a group of enemies is insane. This means you almost always have a melee available to you, which is great because the powered melees on this class are very strong. And for the last fragment, we have Thread of Generation. Dealing damage generates grenade energy. This is so that we can get more grapple grenades to do grapple melees with. This fragment is getting a slight nerf next season, but in my opinion, it will still be a very powerful fragment, and it plays into the gameplay loop perfectly. And that gameplay loop is to basically spam abilities. The loop does take a bit of getting used to, and you have to learn when to attack and when to sit back, but it can absolutely wreck both single targets and groups of adds when you get used to it. The background gameplay is of me doing a solo Master Lost Sector in 4 minutes. It was my second run through of the day after not having played Destiny in like a month, and not having played with this build in even longer, so it can certainly hold up in endgame activities. The skill gap comes from learning when and when not to push. In team play, it is even more effective because not everything is aggroing you, so it can give you time to set up an attack. Like, a teammate can stun a champion while you swoop in and knock it out with a grapple melee, where if you are the one stunning, the champion can sometimes come unstunned because you have to get some distance to get the grapple melee off. The biggest downside to this build is if no enemies are around, because then you don't get to take advantage of the extra melee damage from Syntheseps. And as I will show you shortly, that extra damage is substantial. But before we get to the damage stacking, I want to quickly show you the mods that I run with this build. So when Strand launched, melee and grenade based mods were working with grapple melees. Bungie has since nerfed that, but I've heard conflicting reports on if some still work. So on my helmet, I run Hands On and Ashes to Assets. But if what Bungie has said is true and they don't both work, then you will want to run 2 Hands On here instead. You can get so many different types of melee kills with this build, from your Frenzied Blade to Fletchet's Storm melees to the grapple melee, so double Hands On is actually your best bet. And because this build generates so many orbs, for my armor charge, I also run Font of Wisdom for a faster passive super cooldown. On the gloves, you must run heavy-handed for making orbs on powered melee final blows. This is for super energy, but also to get armor charge and activate the mods we have on our boots. Orbs help us get our abilities so quickly that you are almost never without an ability, and it gives us woven mail from Thread of Warding, which also reduces our melee cooldown from Into the Fray. So orbs are super important to the gameplay loop. We then also run 2 impact induction mods, where causing damage with a melee attack will reduce our grenade cooldown. On the chest, it is pretty standard. I run Concussive Dampener for survivability, and then you can run whatever element specific resist mod you like. I also run a charged up mod for more armor charges. On the boots, we have Absolution to reduce all ability cooldowns, Innervation to reduce our grenade cooldown, and then I run Recuperation to get health back on orb pickup. We don't have Restoration like on Solar, and this build is extremely aggressive, so getting health from picking up an orb after a melee kill is crucial to surviving with this build. You could also run Invigoration in place of one of the first ones if you want an even better melee cooldown but less grenade cooldown. The choice is yours. And finally, on the class item, I have 2 Font of Restoration mods. With my stat splits, this brings me to 90 recovery, which is a lot better than the base 40 recovery my build has. This allows me to heal up quicker and get back into the fight whenever I have to take cover to heal up. I also run a Bomber mod, but you could run Outreach if you would rather get melee energy from casting your class item instead of grenade energy. The choice is yours. So some of those mods are optional, but the big ones are hands-on for super energy on melee kills, heavy-handed to create orbs, and impact induction because you are dealing so much damage with melees, recuperation for health back to keep you alive, and that is pretty much it. The rest you can mix and match as you see fit. Next, we'll quickly go over some stat splits. First and foremost, with any PvE build, we want 100 resilience for that 30% damage reduction. This will help you stay alive. The next stat I spec into is grenade energy. I run 100 so that I can use as many grapple melees as possible. And that is pretty much it. We get melee charges back in a myriad of ways that I've already covered, and then we have Font of Wisdom and Font of Restoration to bring our recovery to 90 and intellect to 70. So essentially, for stats, we have 30, 100, 90, 100, 70, and 30. But thanks to Into the Fray and the huge chunks of melee energy from Thread of Fury, we don't even need to spec into Strength, and Thread of Generation helps massively for an even quicker grenade cooldown. So now that we have the whole build covered, I will give a couple loadout suggestions. If you really want to do a lot of grapple melees, then you can use the exotic trace rifle from the Ghost of the Deep dungeon, the Navigator. If you have the Catalyst, this allows you to shoot a grapple point which you can then grapple off of over and over and grapple melee all the enemies. This is a ton of fun, but it does leave you exposed as there is a decent amount of setup time, so I would only recommend this in team play. But the Navigator is awesome in team play for giving your allies woven mail, so if you really want to use grapple melees, go with the exotic trace rifle. And then a 1-2 punch shotgun in the energy slot and your choice of heavy. But for the loadout suggestion I recommend, I go with Wastelander in the kinetic slot. Mine is crafted and has enhanced 1-2 punch. This is one of those instances where an enhanced trait is really nice. That is because sometimes when you're swinging with your grapple grenade like Tarzan, it can be really tough to land all your pellets on a target, and enhanced 1-2 punch allows some forgiveness by making it so you can miss 2 pellets from your shotgun shot. So I definitely recommend any craftable shotgun that can have 1-2 punch. Aside from Wastelander, you could also run the Ragnahel D kinetic shotgun and Without Remorse solar shotgun, which also have enhanced 1-2 punch. So depending if you use the kinetic or energy slot, your other weapon slot can be whatever you please. In the Lost Sector, I went with a Void Glaive for stunning unstops and dealing with void shields, so use what you like. And then in the heavy slot, I use Tractor Cannon. This provides a 30% debuff to any enemies. So if you have a 1-2 punch shotgun, this will increase your melee damage. It increases a regular melee by 100% and a powered melee by 40%, which doesn't seem like that much, but the powered melees already do decent damage, and then they are being enhanced 200% from Syntheseps. And buffs in Destiny 2 stack multiplicatively, so with a 1-2 punch powered melee enhanced by Syntheseps, we will get 1.4x damage from 1-2 punch and 3x damage from Synthos, meaning a punch that is hitting 4.2 times harder than normal. And if it is a boss or vehicle, the 1-2 punch damage is 25% more, so 65% total, meaning it will hit 4.65 times harder than normal. And then if we add in a Tractor Cannon 30% debuff, we multiply those amounts by 1.3, and then our melee is hitting for 5.46 or 6.045 times more damage. In the thumbnail, however, I tease that your melee can hit for 3,744% more damage, and that is technically true, but it isn't a one-to-one comparison. So while your grapple melee hits for 5.46 times more damage on Carl than a grapple melee with no buffs or debuffs, it hits 37 times harder than a regular melee does. So I'll admit, maybe I used a bit of clickbait and number manipulation to get there, but still, to go from 10,246 damage to 383,604 damage with one melee is crazy, and that is 37.4 times stronger than your base regular melee. And that is about all there is to know about this insanely fun build. I used it a lot after Lightfall launch, and it was great in Neomuna Terminal Overload public events. The bosses in there are quite tanky, and this build messes them up in a hurry. It is also super efficient on ammo because you are mostly using your abilities and only shooting tractor and 1-2 punch shots on tanky targets. And tractor cannon is also great for helping your teammates deal bigger damage. Overall, I absolutely love this build. It is highly aggressive and deals massive damage. I just wanted to wait before making this video because I was worried Synthos may get hit with a nerf next season. But at least for now, they seem to be safe. So go give this build a try and let me know down in the comments how you like it. And if you do like the build and want more unique, strong, and fun builds in the future, consider subscribing. And lastly, if you watched this far, then I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to watch to the end. It means a lot. Have fun punching out all the enemies in sight with this build, and take care.